Amen. I'm still in the morning. I haven't taken a nap yet. I hope you all had a great day so far. I don't know if you watch sports, but didn't go too well for my team, my driver today. He finished second place in the championship. But hey, life goes on. It's not the worst thing that could happen when your teams lose and your drivers don't place how you want them. This is an important thing, is coming together and being together. It's been a great day so far. Tonight we're going to look at, we're going to start in with Ruth. You want to turn to Ruth chapter 2. Today we looked at, we're finishing that Claiming Your Canaan, and we looked at the third part of that. We looked at Joshua chapter 2, and we looked at the life of Rahab and how she was a harlot, and then she met God and became faithful and saved her family, and hid those spies, and her faithfulness saved her family from ruin, from destruction. Well, we're going to look at another one tonight, and we're going to look at Ruth. Like Rahab, Ruth is a hero in the faith. Her faith was shown in her devotion to God, and she had that wonderful loving kindness and that selfless compassion that she showed on her family, especially the one who so desperately needed it. And because of her, we see that redemption unfolding in her life and in her mother-in-law, Naomi, and also in her life. We see a reflection of God's redemption on the faithful. The book of Ruth takes place on the day of in the time of the Judges. Judges chapter 21, verse 25 states, "In those days there was no king in Israel." Then it says, "Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." We see today that people are doing right in their own eyes. And what happens to a society when people do their own thing? We could just look around and we could see what happens when they do it their way and they don't do it God's way. And we look at this time, there is famine in the land, and because of Israel's spiritual adultery, the Midianites and the Amalekites, they go in and they destroy their produce as far as Gaza, and they leave sustenance, in Israel. We can see Judges chapter 6, verse 3 and 4. Ruth was a Moabite, and Moab was known as a heathen land, yet God chose her as an ancestor of David. And we looked at earlier today from our lesson on Rahab, how Salmon and Rahab bore Boaz, and later on Boaz married Ruth. And they bore Obed, and who was the father of Jesse, and of course Jesse was the father of David. All that, and then all the way down to Jesus as we looked at Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5. Tonight we're just going to go briefly, we're going to go through chapters 1 and 2, and then part 2 of not next Sunday, but in 2 Sundays, we're going to look at, I think next Sunday's is the potluck, right? Yeah, so 2 Sundays from tonight, we're going to look at part 2, and we're going to look at chapters 3 and 4. But Ruth had a devotion to God. Her devotion to God was shown in her love and her loyalty she had for her God and family. We look at Ruth chapter 1 and 1 through 5, and we see a very sad story of a woman named Naomi. And Naomi lost her husband. Her husband died, Elimelech, and if that wasn't bad enough, she also lost her 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. I don't know if I got that right. But if you look at that, that's a tragic story. To lose somebody that you love, to lose your spouse for one, but then she goes and she loses her 2 children. And I can just only imagine that the grief that she was going through. However, although she could not see what was coming to her, what God was sending to her, there was hope, even though she probably felt hopeless. She probably felt that, her life just unfolding and being destroyed, losing her family, and she probably didn't have any hope. And in fact, we know that she became bitter and she became angry. There were two blessings left from her two sons, her two daughters-in-law. And we look at her two daughters-in-law, Orpah, and also, of course, and Ruth. And especially Ruth. Ruth was just a great blessing to Naomi. Naomi was a distraught woman. She was bitter. I can't say, like, how could she be bitter? How could she question God? You know, we don't want to question God, but I'm not in that position, and I pray that I'm never in that position. So, you know, we look at that and we think, like, you know, of course it's not God's fault, but she was hurting, and she was, her faith, she didn't have faith. Her faith was not in God at this time for suffering the great loss that she suffered. The three widows went back to Judah, but Naomi told them to return to Moab. She states this in Ruth chapter 1, verse 13. It says, "No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me." So she is grieving, and she feels like God is on her, and God is punishing her. But we know God was not doing that to her. God did not take her husband. God did not take her children. And then notice Ruth. Notice what Ruth does here. Notice the love that she shows to her. The Bible tells us in verse 14 that Ruth clung to her. When we look at the New Testament word for love, that Greek word agape, we've talked about that. You know what that word is, that sacrificial love, that self-sacrificial love that we are to have on others. But we do not really look at the Hebrew word for this. I think it's hesed, H-E-S-E-D. This type of love, you know, it means loving kindness, and it means steadfast love. It's used to describe in the Scriptures a beautiful picture of a love that is a covenant love. It's a loyal love. It's steadfast, and it's an unending type of love that we see when we look at this word. It's used all through the book of Ruth, and also it's used all through the book of Psalms that David writes. And so we see that. Look at this. Turn to Exodus chapter 34, verse 6 and 7. Exodus 34, 6 and 7. It's used here in this passage. It says here, "The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow in anger, and abounding," here's that word, "in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin." See, this is the very essence of God when we look at this. This word, hesed, is a love that we find only in the perfection of God. Yet when we are transformed to bear his image like we looked at today, we talked about that transformation that we are to take. See, we are to mirror these qualities in our life, in the relationships we have. God's love, God's loyalty, God's long-suffering. This was what Ruth was all about. This is what she showed Naomi. Imagine if she didn't. See, Ruth makes a remarkable statement of great faith in this love she had for Naomi. Look at verse 16. Verse 16 and it says, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go," she says, "I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything, but death parts you and me." Yeah, Ruth was a Gentile woman, and she was also a widow. And women of this culture, they were completely dependent on the male, on their husbands. And they weren't treated very well. They were treated terribly at times. They were vulnerable. So when you really reflect upon these words that she has here, they're more amazing as we really look at these words and what she says here. Her commitment to her grieving, distraught mother-in-law, Naomi, is just simply remarkable. And think about what that did for her. I mean, it didn't take away missing her family. It didn't take away her pain. But I guarantee it made things a lot easier for her and helped her and made her look up, made her look to heaven eventually. See, Ruth's commitment came with a serious sacrifice, though. Look at the sacrifice that she had to make. First of all, Ruth had to leave her own family and land. Secondly, by going with Naomi, that basically means that she would live life without a husband, and she would live a life without children. Naomi has no man for her. If she married a non-relative, her commitment to Naomi's family would then be lost. Third, she went to a land unfamiliar to her. See, she needed to go and get accustomed to the people and to get accustomed to their culture, their customs, and their language. You know, I think about going to a foreign land and not knowing the language, not being accustomed to that. It must be tough when you first go somewhere to live. If you were to move to Europe, you know, move to Italy or wherever it may be, you know, it would be hard to start out. They don't change things for foreigners that go there. Fourth, commitment seemed beyond a marriage commitment. If you think about it, she says, where you die, I will die. I will be buried. Verse 17. However, when you look at Ruth, nothing tops the commitment that she ends up making with Naomi's God. Ruth states this at the end of verse 16, your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. See, Ruth did not have to depend on a man. Ruth gave her complete dependence, her complete devotion upon the one and only true God. See, that's how each and every one of us need to be every day of our lives. To be committed and compassionate, first of all, for each other, for God's church, for God's body, God's people, and ultimately 100% committed and devoted to our God, who does everything for us. So we think about hurting and suffering people in this world that are going through what Naomi's going through. A lot of them are. They need hope, don't they? They need to look at you in the light that you could show to them if you know somebody who is hurting. Imagine what you could do for them. Being like her, being like Ruth, showing that compassion and that love and that care. That's what we want to do out there in the world. She never would have been encouraged to realize that God had never left her, that God was still there, that he was still her God if it was not for Ruth. Ruth did what was right, even though it was going to come with a sacrifice. It was going to come with some loss in her life. There's going to be times in our lives that that's going to happen, that we're going to have to make a commitment. And we make that commitment, and it may be that we have to lose something that may be dear to us. We need a sacrifice. When we do that, we can make a big difference in the life of somebody who needs that light, who needs that love, who needs that compassion. Secondly, Ruth was rewarded for taking refuge in God. When we get into chapter 2, if you want to turn over to chapter 2 begins another love story. And in chapter 2, we see that Boaz enters the scene, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, and his name was Boaz. And Boaz was a man of wealth. Wealthy man, but he was also a man of God. Look at verses 2 and 3 of chapter 2. It states, "And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, 'Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor.' And she said to her, 'Go, my daughter.' So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech." See, verse 3 shows God's providence working here. See, it was not a coincidence that Ruth was working in the field that was owned by Boaz. The night I met Tracy, I was going to stay home, but I had hurt my neck. And so I said, well, okay. I was talking to my friend. My friend was dating her sister, and so I said, okay, I'm going to go. You know, I could barely move it, and it wasn't a coincidence that I went. God knew she was there. God knew that we're going to meet. God knew that she was going to be my wife. The rest was history. As soon as we laid eyes on each other. And I mean, you could probably think about your bride, your husband, the time you met. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't on accident. God put you together. Beginning of a love story. See, God's mercy and His providence was working in her life. That sovereign God graciously guided Ruth to Boaz. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 19, it states, "A man's mind plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." Why did I end up going? God says, get over there. You're going to go. God may seem silent at times in our lives, but if we look closely, we can see His providence working in our lives. See, this has all been carefully, providentially worked out for the glory of God's people when we look at it. For Naomi, for Ruth, and also for Boaz. When we look at Ruth chapter 2, verse 8 and 9, we see Boaz shows Ruth much love and respect, and he's very kind to her. And he lets her know that she can glean in the field after they do, and that his servants will not touch her. She's okay. She can go out there. When she is thirsty, ask him. He will give her drink. But here is the most important verse of chapter 2. Look at verse 10. It says, "Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, 'Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?'" See, she shows this humble heart. And she's not a natural Israelite, and she was a widow, and basically she had, when you think about that, she had 2 strikes already against her. But there's a more important question answered in verse 11 through 13. Look at that. Verses 11 through 13, Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." See, Ruth was not favored over anyone. He had eye on her because of what she did. She was not God's employee in the vineyard. She simply took refuge under the wings of the Lord like a baby eaglet does its mother. Think about that with us. Are we taking refuge in God each day as God takes us under His wing, so to speak? The application that we could see from this lesson, we could show ourselves each day devoted to God with love, and show that love and that loyalty to Him and to each other, to one another. Make the necessary sacrifices that we need to make in our lives to help each other and to help others out there who need our help, like Naomi needed help. If she didn't get that help from Ruth, she probably would have left God. Take refuge in the Lord, because God is going to bring His providential care upon you. He's going to guide you in your life. He's going to protect you in your life. God rewards those who are faithful and who are devoted to Him, and we must just remember that. We just must remember, just work for God every day. Do what we need for God every day. Don't take stuff on our shoulders that are completely out of our control, because when we do that, we stress out. Give it to God. God is the one that has providential care over us, that He loves us, and He's going to take care of us. He's going to lead us to where we need to go. He's going to reward us for our work. The lesson is yours today. We could look at the life of Ruth. In 2 weeks, we'll look at the second part of this wonderful book, and we'll look at even more faithfulness of Ruth and what comes about Ruth's life with Naomi. Thank you for your undivided attention, your eyes on me. I didn't put anybody to sleep tonight. Usually I'm looking out there and you're asleep. I'm just kidding. No, I hope you have a wonderful night and a wonderful week, and hopefully we can see everybody back on Wednesday and for Bible class. We're going to be looking at 1 Peter, I think 1 Peter chapter 1. But the lesson is yours tonight. If you need to respond to this lesson tonight, if you need prayer tonight, come forward as we stand and we sing